So again, Lovita Sparks Wade in the house. So nice to have you here.
Oh, thanks
I know
so
we always run into each other out in the world, and I say you got to come join me sometime. And when the time was right, and you decided the time was right, and so now you're here.
Yes.
So I wanted to maybe we just start a little bit. Just tell people about your background. Tell people about your public service and all the kind of things that you've done in your life.
Okay. Well, again, most people know I was born and raised in the city of Gary, Indiana, the greatest city this side of the planet. And next to it is the second greatest city, Hammond, Indiana.
Hey, I was born in East Chicago. Don't forget us, though. Don't forget East Chicago.
You know what? I forget that you're from East Chicago because you're in Hammond so much.
I grew up right down the street.
Yes. And East Chicago as well. Matriculated through the Gary Public School System. Went on to college at Tuskegee University, the home of the famous Tuskegee Airmen.
Really? Interesting.
Absolutely. Did my undergraduate work there. Finished with a degree in political science.
Okay.
And came back home, wanted to really be a part of the community that had served me so well. I was an athlete growing up, and as you know, we're still athletes, Chuck.
Maybe you more than me.
We see each other at the bowling alley all the time. Absolutely.
Well, some people debate whether bowling is it's a few seconds of movement.
Yes, it is.
A few minutes down.
Yes, it is. So I coached volleyball at Lew Wallace for 6 or 7 years, and decided that I really want to get back into what I believe is one of my assignments here on earth, and that's in politics. I worked at the Department of Child Services for 15 years. It was there that I started going back to school and got my master's in public administration from IUN. And then I got into politics a few years later and ran for office. Actually ran for mayor as an independent. That was the first time that I ran for office. Absolutely.
It's always fun when I meet people that run independent. Like, yes. I want to hear your story.
You know what? And run independent, those of you who are thinking about going into politics, because you get an opportunity when you don't have the name recognition, because that was the year that Reagan was running against Karen.
Okay,
so Reagan Hatcher and Karen Freeman Wilson were running. So all of the attention was on them until the fall.
Right.
Then I get some more attention as an independent.
Well, and that's one of the things we always talk about here in the region is the election is usually,
yes.
By the time the fall comes, it's already been
over.
decided. But if we have more people, I'm meeting more people that have that mindset of run as an independent.
Yes.
It's almost like a second chance to get into the race. It gives you more time to meet people and things like that.
Absolutely, it does. And so that increased my visibility. So people were still looking at me, and I was attending meetings and whatnot. And again, I had a lot of time just watching and getting angry behind the scenes.
It's hard not to get angry when you go to the meetings, right? Yeah.
How government was actually working.
Or not working.
Right. Exactly. And so in 2016, I ran as ran as a Democrat in that initial election in the spring, and won as the primary, and won as 6th District Councilwoman in the city of Gary. And I served for 4 years. And the story goes on. Ran for mayor again and lost to Jerome. And that was an interesting election because during that time, when I first filed for that election, that was when I experienced domestic abuse.
Okay.
And it was because of that story that then my profile,
right.
Because what happens with domestic abuse, and this is Domestic Abuse Awareness Month,
right.
as well as Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and I'm a victim of both. I'm a survivor of both, a thriver of both.
Right.
And my sister, my mom, and myself all experienced, are survivors of breast cancer. And my sister and I were diagnosed, Louise, shout out, a couple days apart.
Oh, wow.
We're 10-year survivors. My mom is a 40-year survivor.
Wow.
And my sister had taken the genetic test for the BRCA gene.
Okay.
I think that's how you say it. So we're not, and it came out negative. So we do believe that it's a result of our environment.
I was going to ask about that.
Yes.
I'm hearing more and more people that grew up here.
Yes.
We have these cancer clusters.
Yes.
Again, these stories that aren't being talked about. When you might have a neighborhood where multiple people had brain tumors
Right.
or breast cancer or, my mother died of uterine cancer. I mean, these cancer clusters in neighborhoods, this isn't right.
Yes.
And again, it's something that we need to spend more time investigating.
Absolutely.
Especially, like with the lead crisis that came up a few years ago, kind of brought attention to the environment that we kind of forget about because it's under our feet, right?
Yes.
One of the things I want to mention before we get too far into this, we're doing this sort of podcast style. So we kind of decided there's so much we need to get through. So what I want to do is we're going to let Levita, we're going to talk, and then I'll take calls later. So we want to get through Levita's story, and then we can kind of take some calls. I'll take calls later. We can kind of, you guys can have your say on things. But there's so much that I wanted to get through with you.
Absolutely.
So we're just going to focus on that.
Absolutely.
So, did you kind of feel your whole life that you wanted to be kind of a public servant? Was that something that you always had that calling?
From 6th grade, Sherman Newell's 6th grade social studies class at Edison Middle School.
Yeah.
He had us to do the who, what, when, where, why of current events.
Okay.
And we would have to cut out articles. And I actually remember Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was in the cabinet. Exactly. He was in the cabinet. You might
I think
remember?
I'm going to know this one.
Okay. He was in Jimmy Carter's cabinet.
Right.
Okay. And his daughter is now on Morning Joe.
Okay.
Okay. Can't remember her first name, but she's Brzezinski as well.
Okay.
And but that is what from 12 years old, being exposed to the news and understanding what was going on in the world, what was going on in the state, what was going on in my local community is what triggered me to go into.
And you mentioned, if you were listening earlier, we were talking about sort of how young people are getting their news from TikTok. And it's interesting to think about, you grew up, reading the paper and watching the news, and now the next generation, they're getting hit with these TikTok, the doom scrolling as they call it. They're getting hit with a different version of news, and it really makes me wonder. I always say, obviously you get to a point like it's not about me anymore, it's about the next generation.
Right.
And I really think about the next generation, the ones that'll be running for politics,
Absolutely.
running the world. How did they grow up, and how are they consuming news? What are they being told? And sort of the reoccurring theme here on my show has always been, there's two sides of the story. There's the story that you read, there's the story you read in the newspaper, and then there's the other side of it.
Yeah.
And I've said from the beginning, one of the things that got me into this was, like you said, I'd go to these meetings, I'd go to these events, and then I'd read about it the next day and say, I don't think they're at the same meeting I was at.
Yes, exactly,
right?
exactly.
And so it really made me realize that there's more to the story. And if we were just talking about how most people just read the headline, they read that first paragraph, they're never going to get the story.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
And so there's so much more to it. It's so much more in depth. There's some people that just don't have the time or the interest. That's fine. You want to read a headline and move on. There's some people that want to know the full story.
Right.
And that's why we're here. That's why we have, this access here on the radio where we can sit and talk and bring people in like yourself that have interesting stories and find out more about it.
And thank you so much, Chuck, for having me on. You have always been kind. We've always been cordial. And whether or not we agreed when we came to the end of our conversation,
right,
we were still friends with each other.
Right.
And it's important that people with differing opinions have a civil discourse.
Right.
Versus an uncivil one.
And one of the things I always tell people, I said, I get bored of talking to people that look like me.
Yeah.
Because I've heard that story before, right? And so I always like to bring
Absolutely.
on people that don't look like me, haven't had the same.
Absolutely.
We grew up East Chicago, Gary, kind of the same background, but obviously people's lives take them to different places. So it's always interesting to me to meet different people and hear different stories, because one of the things I think that we're finding is people are so closed off now. They don't want to hear other sides of the story. They don't want to consider other opinions. And it's unfortunate because,
Absolutely.
No one should say, I've got it all figured out, right? One of the first things I always say, I have no idea what's going on. I want to hear other people's opinions, and I want to bring that to the table and hear other stories. So, and one of the things I learned about with the media was anytime somebody I knew got written about, I usually reached out to him. I said, okay, well, what's the real story? What's the rest of the story? Because there's always more to it. And that's why, when I run into you, I said, when you're ready, I want to hear the rest of the story. Right.
Let me mention my son, because I'm going to bring up a controversial name right now, but we're not going to discuss it because we don't have that kind of time.
Right.
But when the news of Charlie Kirk getting shot hit the airways, it was my 21-year-old son who brought it to me.
Okay.
Because he'd gotten it. He's on social media. He'd gotten it first. And it was the reaction, the response, the initial response is what triggered me to make sure that even my own son is more compassionate. Because born and raised in the household that he lives in, I consider myself not a liberal. I'm like in between.
Yeah. Most people consider themselves in the middle, right?
In the middle.
Looking for a home at this point.
Absolutely, because look, I'm a female athlete who believe that born female athletes should only compete against each other.
Right.
Because if, there's a fellow named Teuton that I grew up with, and that's the he played football for Lew Wallace, right?
Okay.
I wouldn't want him throwing the shot put on my track team,
right?
Because he'd beat everybody. Okay, if he decided that, and I know Teuton, I love you, that wouldn't be fair, you know. So because of those types of issues, I consider myself more of a center.
Well, and again, it's sort of the idea of, when you come to rational conclusions, it's hard to find a home in this society, right? It's hard to find a political home.
Absolutely.
When you're having these sort of, okay, here, and I was talking earlier, the idea about one of the biggest problems of politics is, if you are a Democrat or Republican, you basically have to go along with.
Yeah.
And I've always said, we need to be our harshest critics.
Absolutely.
Democrats should be, pushing other Democrats. Is this the right path forward? Republicans, us libertarians love to fight with libertarians.
Right.
We love to argue about things. And it's always the question of, there are certain things with the parties where they say it's been decided, it's off limits. And I'm sure there's been times when you've been told this is how it's going to be. And then certain people, I know someone like you get told, here's how it's going to be. No. There's room for discussion here.
There's room for discussion.
Right.
So my son's initial response was a chuckle. It was a giggle. Because he disagreed with Charlie Kirk's point of view.
And that was a lot of social media was sort of that reaction, right?
Mine was a gasp.
Right.
Because, oh my gosh, this was a human being.
Right.
I disagreed with most of what he said, but in America, we still have the right to say what we want to say, barring, screaming fire in a crowded theater,
right,
without impunity.
Right.
Okay, so being able to speak your mind, and let's circle back to politics. If you're a part of a political party and a part of an administration, especially like I was as parks director in the city of Gary, you can't speak your mind. You are under the authority of that elected official that hired you or who hired you. And so when our story came out, let's go back to
So why don't we?
What happened?
We're going to take a break in a little bit. So why don't we before you get too far into that, let's take a break, because unlike podcasts, I don't get to go 3 hours straight. So we have to take a break, pay some bills. So let's take a quick break. We'll be back with more after this.
Absolutely.